The stagecoach lay on its side like a dying beetle, one wheel still spinning lazily in the hot Colorado afternoon sun, and Eleanor Sullivan knew with absolute certainty that she was going to die out here in the wilderness, miles from the town of Loveland where her intended husband waited. The driver and guard had both been thrown clear when the horses spooked at a rattlesnake, and while the driver had limped off toward town cursing and holding his ribs, the guard had simply pointed east and told her to walk straight until she hit the main road, then vanished in the opposite direction to chase down the scattered horses. That had been 4 hours ago, or maybe 5. Eleanor had lost track of time somewhere between the endless pine trees, and the moment she realized the sun was no longer where she expected it to be. Her traveling dress, a sensible gray wool she had purchased in Philadelphia specifically for this journey west, now clung to her back with perspiration. The carpetbag containing all her worldly possessions had grown heavier with each step, until she had finally abandoned it beside a lightning-struck tree, keeping only her small purse with the letter from her betrothed, and what little money remained after the long journey. She was 22 years old, had left behind a perfectly miserable life working in her uncle's textile factory, and was supposed to be married by Sunday to a man named Walter Pritchard, who owned a mercantile in Loveland. His letters had been cordial if not warm. His photograph had shown a neat man with a tidy mustache, and most importantly, he had promised her a home, security, and respectful treatment. It was more than most mail-order brides could hope for in the year 1876, and Eleanor had counted herself fortunate. Now she was lost in the Colorado wilderness with the sun sinking lower and her throat so dry she could barely swallow. She stumbled over an exposed root and fell hard onto her knees, the impact jarring through her bones. For a moment, she simply stayed there, breathing hard, fighting back tears that would only waste precious moisture. Her mother had always said Eleanor was too practical for her own good, too level-headed to dream. But her mother had also died when Eleanor was 15, and never had to face the choice between factory work that would grind her into dust by 40 or marriage to a stranger. Eleanor pushed herself back to her feet and kept walking, though she no longer had any idea if she was heading toward civilization or deeper into the mountains. The trees pressed close on all sides, their shadows lengthening as the day wore on. She thought she heard water somewhere to her left and turned toward it, desperate enough now that caution seemed pointless. The sound of rushing water grew louder, and she nearly sobbed with relief as she pushed through a stand of aspens and found a creek, clear and cold and perfect. Eleanor fell to her knees on the bank and cupped her hands, drinking deeply, not caring that her sleeves got soaked or that she was making small, desperate sounds with each swallow. The water tasted like life itself, sharp and clean and achingly cold. She had just sat back on her heels, catching her breath, when she heard something move in the brush behind her. Eleanor spun, her heart leaping into her throat, and found herself staring at the largest man she had ever seen in her life. He stood at least 6.5 feet tall, broad through the shoulders in a way that made the buckskin shirt he wore strain at the seams. His hair fell past his shoulders in dark waves that caught reddish glints in the fading sunlight, and his face was all hard angles and sharp edges, weathered by sun and wind. His arms were bare below the rolled sleeves of his shirt, corded with muscle that flexed as he shifted the rifle he carried. Everything about him spoke of raw strength and power, from the width of his chest to the solid stance of his boots against the forest floor. Eleanor's first instinct was to run, but her legs had gone to water, and besides, where would she run to? She was already lost, already helpless, already at the mercy of this wilderness. If this mountain man meant her harm, there was absolutely nothing she could do to stop him. "Please," she managed to say, her voice coming out as barely more than a whisper. "Please, I am lost. I do not mean to trespass. The stagecoach overturned and I was told to walk east, but I fear I have become terribly turned around." The man stared at her for a long moment with eyes the color of winter sky, pale and sharp and assessing. Then he moved closer with surprising grace for someone so large, and Eleanor could not help but notice the way his muscles shifted under his skin, the easy strength in every movement. He crouched down beside her, his rifle resting across his thighs, and studied her face with an intensity that made her want to look away, but somehow she could not. "You are miles from any road," he said finally, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to resonate in her chest. "You walked southwest, not east. Another few hours and you would have been in the high country with no shelter and no food." His gaze moved over her, taking in her city clothes and fine leather shoes, already scuffed and torn from her ordeal. "What is a woman like you doing out here alone?" "I am to be married," Eleanor said, lifting her chin despite her exhaustion. "In Loveland, to Mr. Walter Pritchard, but the coach overturned and everyone scattered and I just wanted to reach the town." Something flickered in his eyes, though Eleanor could not read the expression. "Loveland is a full day's walk from here, maybe more given your condition. Night comes fast in the mountains and it gets cold. Do you have supplies? Food? A blanket?" Eleanor shook her head, feeling foolish and small and completely out of her depth. "I had a bag, but I left it behind. I was so tired and it was so heavy." The man was quiet for another moment, then he stood and held out his hand to her. "I am Quentin Xerxes. I have a cabin about 5 miles north of here. You can stay the night, get your strength back, and tomorrow I will take you down to Loveland." Eleanor looked at his extended hand, calloused and scarred and twice the size of her own, and knew she had no real choice. She was lost, exhausted, and night was coming. This stranger could do whatever he wanted to her regardless of whether she took his hand, and at least he was offering help rather than harm. She placed her palm against his and felt his fingers close around hers, warm and solid and surprisingly gentle. Quentin pulled her to her feet with no apparent effort, as though she weighed nothing at all. Eleanor swayed, dizzy from standing too quickly, and his other hand came up to steady her elbow. "When did you last eat?" he asked. "This morning. Some bread and cheese at the way station." He made a disapproving sound in his throat and released her, slinging his rifle over his shoulder. "Can you walk 5 miles?" Eleanor wanted to say yes, wanted to prove she was not some helpless city woman who could not manage basic survival, but honesty forced her to shake her head. "I do not think so. I have been walking since midday and my legs are shaking." Quentin studied her again with those piercing eyes, then made a decision. Before Eleanor could process what was happening, he had stepped close and bent down, sliding one arm behind her knees and the other around her back. He lifted her up against his chest as easily as if she were a child, cradling her securely. "Wait," Eleanor gasped, her hands instinctively clutching at his shirt. "You cannot carry me 5 miles. I am too heavy. I will walk, I can manage." "You weigh less than the deer I carried out last week," Quentin said matter-of-factly, already starting to walk with long, steady strides that ate up the ground. "Save your strength." Eleanor wanted to protest further, but the truth was she felt safer here, held against this stranger's broad chest, than she had felt since the moment the stagecoach tipped. She could feel the solid muscle of his arms beneath her, the steady thud of his heartbeat, the easy way he breathed despite carrying her weight and his rifle. His body radiated heat that drove away the evening chill beginning to creep through the forest. "Why are you helping me?" she asked after they had walked in silence for several minutes. What kind of question is that? An honest one. You do not know me. For all you know, I could be a criminal fleeing justice, or a liar, or trouble of some kind. Quentin glanced down at her, and Eleanor saw something that might have been amusement flicker across his hard features. Are you any of those things? No, but you do not know that. I know you are wearing clothes that cost more than most people in Loveland make in a month. Your hands have no calluses, so you have not done manual labor, and you speak with an Eastern accent. That tells me you are exactly what you say you are, a mail-order bride from back east coming to marry some merchant who paid your passage. I also know you are exhausted, scared, and would not last a night alone out here. So I am taking you to my cabin where you can rest, and tomorrow I will take you to your intended husband. He paused. Does that answer your question? Eleanor felt her face flush and was grateful for the dimming light. Yes, thank you. They walked on, and the forest grew darker around them. But Quentin never slowed his pace, navigating the rough terrain with the ease of someone who knew every root and stone. Eleanor found herself relaxing against him despite her better judgment, her head settling against his shoulder, lulled by the steady rhythm of his stride and the warmth of his body. She had not felt safe in so long, not since before her mother died, and there was something about this large, quiet man that made her feel protected in a way she had never experienced. "Tell me about yourself," she said, needing to break the silence before she fell asleep in his arms. "How does a man come to live alone in the mountains?" "Some men are better suited to solitude," Quentin said simply. "That is not much of an answer. It is the only one I have." He shifted her slightly, adjusting his grip, and Eleanor noticed he showed no sign of fatigue despite having carried her for what must have been close to 2 miles now. "I came west after the war. Did not like cities, did not like crowds. Found this place and it suited me." "The war," Eleanor repeated. "You fought." "Most men my age did." She wanted to ask more, wanted to know what horrors he had seen that had driven him into these lonely mountains, but the tightness in his voice warned her away from the topic. Instead, she asked, "Do you hunt, trap? How do you make your living?" "Both. I bring furs and meat down to Loveland every few weeks, trade for what I need. It is a simple life, but it suits me." "Do you never get lonely?" Quentin was quiet for so long Eleanor thought he would not answer. Then he said, "Loneliness is different from being alone. I prefer being alone. It is simpler. People complicate things." Eleanor thought about that, about her own desperate escape from Philadelphia, and the uncle who had worked her until her hands bled, the other factory girls who had looked at her with envy when she received Walter Pritchard's proposal. "I suppose people do complicate things," she agreed softly. The cabin appeared quite suddenly as they crested a small rise, nestled in a clearing with tall pines standing guard on all sides. It was larger than Eleanor had expected, built from solid logs chinked with clay, with a stone chimney rising from one end and a small covered porch across the front. A lean-to stable stood to one side where a large bay horse watched their approach with mild interest. Quentin carried her up the porch steps, and somehow managed to open the door without putting her down, then finally set her on her feet inside. Eleanor swayed and caught herself against a rough wooden table that dominated the center of the single large room. Her legs trembled with exhaustion and relief at no longer having to support her own weight. The cabin was surprisingly clean and well organized. A large bed occupied one corner, neatly made with what looked like a bare fur serving as a blanket. A stone fireplace took up most of one wall, with cooking implements hanging beside it, and several pots stacked neatly on the hearth. Shelves lined another wall, holding supplies and tools, all arranged with almost military precision. A few chairs, a table, and a chest completed the sparse furnishings. Quentin moved past her to the fireplace and began building up the fire that still smoldered there from morning, adding logs with practiced efficiency. Within minutes, flames were crackling cheerfully, driving back the chill and casting dancing shadows across the walls. He filled a pot with water from a barrel near the door and set it to heat, then turned to Eleanor. "Sit," he said, gesturing to one of the chairs near the fire. "I will make food." Eleanor sank gratefully into the chair, watching as he moved around the cabin with economical grace. Despite his size, he never seemed clumsy or awkward, every movement purposeful and controlled. He cut thick slices of bread from a loaf wrapped in cloth, produced dried meat and cheese from a wooden box, sliced an apple with a knife that looked almost delicate in his large hands. He arranged it all on a wooden plate and handed it to her, then poured hot water over what smelled like pine needle tea in a tin cup. "Thank you," Eleanor said, and meant it with all her heart. She ate slowly at first, trying to maintain some semblance of manners, but hunger won out and she devoured everything on the plate with embarrassing speed. Quentin handed her more bread without comment, and she ate that too, finally feeling the gnawing emptiness in her stomach begin to ease. He made his own meal and sat in the other chair, eating in silence while the fire crackled between them. Eleanor found herself studying him in the firelight, taking in details she had missed in the forest. His face was younger than she had first thought, probably no more than 30, though hard living had carved lines around his eyes and mouth. His hands were scarred from a lifetime of rough work, but his movements were careful and precise. There was a kind of isolated dignity about him, a self-sufficiency that spoke of years spent relying on no one but himself. "I should sleep on the floor," Eleanor said when she had finished eating, her practical nature reasserting itself now that immediate survival was no longer in question. "You have been kind enough to help me. I will not take your bed as well." Quentin looked at her steadily across the fire. "You will take the bed I have slept on worse than a floor. That is not proper. I am to be married. What would people think if they knew I had spent the night in a bachelor's cabin? People will not know unless you tell them, and you need rest more than you need to worry about propriety right now." His voice was firm but not unkind. "I will not take advantage of you if that is your concern. I have no interest in a woman who belongs to another man." Eleanor felt her face heat again. "I did not mean to imply that you would. I only meant that it does not seem right for me to displace you." "You are not displacing me. I am choosing to give you the bed." He stood and went to a chest in the corner, pulling out a thick woolen blanket. "Now stop arguing and get some sleep. We leave at first light and it is a long walk down to Loveland. There seemed to be no point in arguing further." Eleanor rose on shaking legs and moved to the bed, sitting gingerly on the edge. The furs were surprisingly soft under her hands, and the mattress, though simple, was well made. She unlaced her ruined shoes and slipped them off, then lay down fully clothed, too exhausted to care about wrinkles or impropriety. The bed smelled like pine and wood smoke and something else, something masculine and clean that must be Quentin himself. "Thank you," she said again, her voice already slurring with exhaustion, "for everything. You saved my life today." Quentin had settled by the fire, wrapping himself in the blanket with his back against the wall where he could watch both the door and the room. "Sleep," was all he said. Eleanor meant to stay awake, meant to think about Walter Pritchard and her impending marriage and everything that had happened today. But sleep claimed her almost instantly, dragging her down into dreamless darkness. She woke once in the night to find the fire burned low and the cabin dark except for moonlight streaming through the single window. Quentin still sat against the wall, his eyes reflecting the dim light like an animal's, watching. Eleanor should have been frightened, but instead she felt only that same strange sense of safety, and she drifted back to sleep without fear. When she woke again, it was to gray dawn light and the smell of food cooking. Eleanor sat up, disoriented for a moment, then remembered where she was. Quentin stood at the fireplace, frying something in a pan, fully dressed with his hair tied back and his rifle leaning against the wall within easy reach. "Good morning," Eleanor said, her voice rough from sleep. He glanced over his shoulder. "Morning. There is water for washing in the basin. Food will be ready soon." Eleanor swung her legs out of bed and found her shoes had been set beside the door, cleaned of mud and dried by the fire. The small gesture of kindness touched her more than it probably should have. She washed her face and hands in the cold water from the basin, trying to make herself presentable, painfully aware of how disheveled she must look after sleeping in her clothes. Breakfast was fried fish and more bread, simple but filling. They ate in silence, though it was a comfortable silence rather than an awkward one. Eleanor found herself watching Quentin again, noticing the way morning light caught the bronze tone of his skin, the strength in his forearms as he moved. He was handsome in a rough, unpolished way that was nothing like the neat propriety of Walter Pritchard's photograph, and she found herself wondering what had really driven him into these mountains, what secrets he carried behind those winter-colored eyes. "Ready?" he asked when they had finished eating and packed away the remains. Eleanor nodded, though her legs still ached from yesterday's ordeal. Quentin filled a canteen with water and slung it over his shoulder along with his rifle, then led her out into the cool morning air. The world looked different in daylight, less threatening somehow, though the vast wilderness still stretched in all directions with no signs of civilization. They walked for perhaps half an hour before Eleanor's legs began to tremble again. She tried to hide it, but Quentin noticed everything, and without a word he stopped and held out his arms. Eleanor wanted to protest, wanted to prove she could manage on her own, but pride seemed foolish when weighed against practicality. "I am sorry," she said as he lifted her again, settling her against his chest with the same easy strength as yesterday. "I am not usually so weak. The factory work kept me strong enough, but I suppose walking through mountains is different from standing at a loom 12 hours a day." "You worked in a factory?" Quentin asked, his long strides carrying them steadily downhill along what might have been a game trail. "In Philadelphia. My uncle owned part of a textile mill. When my mother died, he took me in, but I had to work for my keep. It was not a bad life exactly, but it was not a good one either. Long hours, poor pay, and my uncle made it clear I was a burden he tolerated rather than welcomed." Eleanor found herself talking more than she had intended, the words spilling out perhaps because Quentin was a stranger she would never see again after today, or perhaps because his steady presence invited confidence. "When I saw the advertisement for mail-order brides, it seemed like a chance for something different. Mr. Pritchard seemed respectable in his letters. He promised me my own home, enough to eat, and kind treatment. That is more than many women can hope for." "But not love," Quentin said, and there was something in his voice Eleanor could not quite identify. "Love is a luxury for people with choices," Eleanor said firmly. "I have been practical my whole life. I know what I am agreeing to, and I am at peace with it. Are you?" The question hung in the air between them. Eleanor wanted to say yes, wanted to insist she had made her peace with a marriage of convenience to a man she had never met, but something about Quentin's directness demanded honesty. "I am doing what I must to survive," she said finally. "We all are. You chose these mountains. I chose a marriage to Mr. Pritchard. We both did what we had to do." Quentin made a non-committal sound but did not argue. They walked on through the morning, stopping occasionally for water and rest. Eleanor tried to walk on her own several times, but never managed more than a mile before her legs gave out, and Quentin would lift her again without complaint, his strength apparently limitless. The sun was high overhead when they finally emerged from the forest onto a genuine road, rutted with wagon tracks and blessedly familiar after the wild uncertainty of the mountains. In the distance, Eleanor could see buildings, the first signs of Loveland emerging from the valley below. "We are here," she said, feeling an odd mixture of relief and something else, something she did not want to examine too closely. Quentin set her down on the road and Eleanor swayed, grabbing his arm to steady herself. His muscles were like iron under her hand, solid and warm through the buckskin shirt. She looked up at him, this man who had saved her life and asked nothing in return, and felt words tangling in her throat that had no business being there. "Thank you," she managed finally. "I will never forget your kindness." He looked down at her with those pale, searching eyes, and for a moment Eleanor thought he might say something important, something that would change everything. But then his expression shuddered and he simply nodded. "Can you walk from here?" he asked. Eleanor tested her legs and found they would hold her, at least for the flat road into town. "Yes, I can manage now. Then I will leave you here. Your intended is probably worried." He turned to go and something in Eleanor's chest twisted painfully. "Wait," she called before she could stop herself. "Will I see you again? When you come to town to trade?" Quentin paused, his back to her, broad shoulders blocking the sun. "Loveland is a small town. I suppose you might see me, though I do not stay long when I come down from the mountain." It was not the answer Eleanor wanted, though she could not have said what answer would have satisfied her. She watched him walk back toward the forest, his long strides carrying him away from her, with the same easy grace that had carried her to safety. Within minutes, he had disappeared into the trees as though he had never been there at all, and Eleanor was left standing alone on the road to Loveland, her heart inexplicably heavy. She forced herself to start walking, each step carrying her closer to the life she had chosen, the practical marriage to a respectable merchant who would give her security and comfort if not love. It was everything she had wanted when she left Philadelphia. It should have been enough. The town of Loveland was larger than Eleanor had expected, with a proper main street lined with businesses and houses spreading out in neat rows on either side. She drew curious stares as she walked down the street in her dirty, wrinkled traveling dress, her hair falling loose from its pins and her face probably still showing the effects of her ordeal. Eleanor lifted her chin and kept walking, scanning the storefronts for Pritchard's Mercantile. She found it near the center of town, a substantial building with large windows displaying various goods. Eleanor paused outside, smoothing her dress uselessly and tucking her hair behind her ears, trying to make herself presentable. Then she pushed open the door and stepped inside. The mercantile was well stocked and organized, with barrels of flour and sugar, bolts of cloth, tools and household goods arranged neatly on shelves and tables. A man stood behind the counter helping a customer, and Eleanor recognized him immediately from his photograph. Walter Pritchard was exactly as he appeared in the picture, neat and tidy with a carefully trimmed mustache and clothes that spoke of modest prosperity. He looked up at the sound of the door and his eyes widened when he saw her. "Miss Sullivan?" he asked, his voice carrying a note of disbelief. "Eleanor Sullivan?" "Yes," Eleanor said, moving closer. "I apologize for my appearance. The stagecoach overturned yesterday and I was lost in the wilderness until a trapper found me and brought me within sight of town." Walter came around the counter, his expression shifting between relief and concern. "We heard about the accident. The driver limped in yesterday evening saying you had been thrown clear and were walking to town, but when you never arrived we feared the worst. I was about to organize a search party." He looked her over with a critical eye that made Eleanor feel like merchandise being assessed. "Are you injured? Do you need a doctor?" "I am fine, just tired and hungry. The trapper fed me and let me rest at his cabin, then carried me most of the way down the mountain this morning." Something flickered in Walter's eyes at that. "A trapper, a man, you spent the night at his cabin." Eleanor felt her back stiffen at his tone. "I was lost and would have died without his help. He was a perfect gentleman and showed me only kindness." "I see." Walter's voice had gone cool. "Well, regardless of the circumstances, you are here now. I have rooms above the store. You can rest and clean up there, and we will discuss our arrangement later." There was something in the way he said arrangement that made Eleanor's stomach tighten, but she was too exhausted to deal with whatever concerns he might have. She followed him up a narrow staircase to a set of rooms that were as neat and orderly as the store below, everything in its place, not a speck of dust to be seen. "The spare room is there," Walter said, pointing to a door. "You may use it to freshen up. I will send for bath water and find you a change of clothes. We will speak this evening." He left her alone, and Eleanor sank onto the bed in the spare room, suddenly so tired she could barely hold her eyes open. The room was nice enough, clean and functional with a window overlooking the street, but it felt cold somehow, impersonal, nothing like the warm cabin where she had felt safer than she had any right to. Eleanor closed her eyes and saw Quentin's face, those winter eyes studying her with an intensity that had made her feel seen in a way she never had before. She thought about the careful way he had lifted her, the steady beat of his heart under her ear as he carried her through the wilderness, the quiet strength that had never wavered. Then she opened her eyes and looked around the neat, cold room that would be her new home, and tried very hard not to compare it to a cabin in the mountains where a lonely man lived by choice rather than circumstance. Over the next few days, Eleanor learned several things about Walter Pritchard. He was organized to the point of obsession, his store and his life run with rigid efficiency. He was respected in town, known as a fair merchant who did not cheat his customers. He attended church every Sunday and expected his future wife to do the same. He had specific ideas about how a household should be run, what role a wife should play, and he outlined these expectations to Eleanor with the same precision he used to inventory his stock. "I am not an unreasonable man," he told her on the third evening after her arrival as they sat in his tidy parlor. "I will provide for you well. You will have your own household money, nice clothes, a comfortable home. In return, I expect you to manage the household, help in the store when needed, and maintain the proper appearance of a respectable merchant's wife. I think that is more than fair given the circumstances." "What circumstances?" Eleanor asked carefully. Walter's mouth tightened. "The circumstances of your arrival, Miss Sullivan. The fact that you spent a night alone with a man in the wilderness, that you arrived in town disheveled and carried in that man's arms. People talk, and while I have done my best to manage the situation, it has put me in an awkward position." Eleanor felt anger kindle in her chest. "I was lost and would have died. That man saved my life and behaved with perfect honor. What was I supposed to do, refuse his help to preserve appearances?" "You were supposed to stay with the stagecoach," Walter said sharply. "You were supposed to wait for help rather than wandering off into the wilderness alone. But what is done is done. We will be married as planned on Sunday, and in time people will forget the unfortunate circumstances of your arrival." Eleanor wanted to argue, wanted to defend Quentin, who had shown her more genuine kindness in one day than Walter had managed in 3, but she bit her tongue. She had come here to marry this man, had accepted his proposal knowing full well it was a business arrangement rather than a romance. She had no right to be disappointed that he was exactly what she had expected him to be. Sunday came and Eleanor wore a dress Walter had purchased for her, simple and modest and appropriate for a merchant's wife. She stood in the small church and spoke her vows in a clear voice, promising to love, honor, and obey a man she barely knew. Walter slipped a plain gold band on her finger and kissed her briefly, perfunctorily, and it was done. Eleanor Sullivan became Eleanor Pritchard, wife to a respectable merchant in Loveland, Colorado. The wedding breakfast was attended by several of the town's prominent citizens, all of whom congratulated Walter on his sensible choice of bride. Eleanor smiled and thanked them, and tried not to notice how Walter's hand on her elbow felt like ownership rather than affection. That night, in the marriage bed, Walter was efficient and quick, explaining that marital relations were a duty rather than a pleasure and should be approached with proper restraint. Eleanor lay still and tried not to compare his hurried, mechanical movements with her brief imagining of what it might be like to be touched by large, calloused hands with surprising gentleness. Afterward, Walter went to his own room, explaining that he had never liked sharing a bed and saw no reason to start now that the deed was done. Eleanor lay alone in the dark and told herself this was fine. This was what she had agreed to. This was the security and respect she had sought. She told herself she was grateful and fortunate and should not want for more. She told herself this every day for 3 weeks and almost believed it. Then one afternoon Quentin Xerxes walked into Pritchard's mercantile carrying a bundle of furs, and Eleanor felt her heart stop in her chest. He looked exactly as she remembered, large and powerful and out of place among the neat shelves and organized displays. His hair was tied back, his buckskin clothes clean but clearly worn, his winter eyes scanning the store until they found her behind the counter. Something flickered in his expression, there and gone so quickly she might have imagined it. "I need to trade," he said, his deep voice seeming to fill the space. Walter emerged from the back room, his expression shifting when he saw Quentin. "Mr. Xerxes, I see you have furs. Let me examine them." Eleanor watched as Walter inspected the furs with a critical eye, naming prices that seemed lower than they should be. Quentin's jaw tightened, but he did not argue, simply nodded and accepted what was offered. Eleanor wanted to speak up, wanted to tell Walter he was cheating this man who had saved her life. But wives did not contradict their husbands in public. When the transaction was complete, Quentin took his credit and began gathering supplies: flour, salt, coffee, ammunition for his rifle. Eleanor watched him move through the store, trying not to make it obvious she was watching, failing completely. He brought his selections to the counter and Walter tallied them up, taking his time about it, making Quentin wait. Eleanor stood to the side, her hands clasped tightly together, and when Quentin's eyes met hers she saw something in them that made her breath catch. "Mrs. Pritchard," he said quietly, nodding to her with perfect formality. "Mr. Xerxes," she managed to reply. "It is good to see you well." "And you?" His gaze held hers for a moment longer, and in that moment Eleanor felt more seen, more understood than she had in all the weeks of her marriage. Then he gathered his supplies and walked out of the store, back to his mountain, back to his solitary life, and Eleanor felt something inside her crack. "That is the man?" Walter asked once Quentin was gone. "What man?" Eleanor asked, though she knew perfectly well what he meant. "The trapper who found you, the one you spent the night with. I told you nothing improper occurred. Perhaps not." Walter's voice was hard. "But I saw how you looked at him, Eleanor, and I saw how he looked at you. I will not have people saying my wife pines for a mountain man like some romantic fool. You will not speak to him again if he comes to trade. You will stay in the back room. You understand?" Eleanor wanted to argue, wanted to point out that she had barely spoken to Quentin at all, but she could see the rigid set of Walter's jaw and knew it would do no good. "I understand," she said quietly. Walter nodded, satisfied, and went back to his inventory. Eleanor stood behind the counter and stared at the door through which Quentin had vanished, and felt the careful walls she had built around her heart begin to crumble. That night, she lay in her bed and finally admitted what she had been denying for weeks. She had made a terrible mistake. She had chosen security over happiness, practicality over feeling, and now she was trapped in a marriage that felt more like a prison with each passing day. Walter was not cruel exactly, but he was cold, controlling, concerned with appearances and propriety rather than warmth or companionship. He wanted a wife the way he wanted proper stock for his store, something useful that fulfilled a function and looked respectable. And Eleanor had agreed to it, had walked into this cage willingly, and now the door was locked and there was no way out. She thought about Quentin alone in his mountain cabin, living free and wild with no one to answer to, and felt a longing so intense it was almost physical. She thought about the way he had carried her so carefully, the warmth of his body, the steady beat of his heart. She thought about winter eyes that had looked at her as though she mattered, as though she was more than just a useful object, but it was too late. She was married, bound by law and church and society to a man she could never love, and any feelings she might have for a mountain man who lived alone by choice were irrelevant and impossible. Eleanor turned her face into her pillow and cried for the first time since her mother died, silent tears of frustration and regret, and bitter longing for something she had never even known she wanted, until it was too late. The weeks passed slowly. Eleanor managed Walter's household with the efficiency he demanded, helped in the store, attended church, played the role of respectable merchant's wife with perfect precision. She smiled when expected, spoke when spoken to, and slowly felt herself disappearing beneath the weight of propriety and duty. Quentin came to town twice more over the next months, and each time Eleanor made sure to stay in the back room as Walter had commanded. But she could hear his deep voice through the door, and each time she felt that same crack in her heart widen a little more. Winter came to the Colorado mountains, bringing snow and cold that kept people close to their fires. The store was quieter with fewer travelers and traders braving the weather. Eleanor stood at the window one gray afternoon watching snow fall on the empty street and wondered what Quentin was doing up in his cabin, if he was warm enough, if he had sufficient supplies, if he was lonely. She wondered if he ever thought about her the way she could not stop thinking about him. "Eleanor," Walter called from behind her, "stop daydreaming and help me with inventory." She turned from the window and went to do as commanded, because that was what good wives did, and tried not to notice how much smaller the store felt with each passing day, how much tighter the collar of propriety closed around her throat. Then in late December, a blizzard struck with unprecedented fury, howling down from the mountains and burying Loveland in snow. The mercantile had to close for 3 days while the storm raged, and Eleanor sat in the rooms above the store listening to whinds shriek like something alive and wondered if Quentin was safe. When the storm finally passed and the town began to dig itself out, word came that several trappers who had been caught in the high country were missing. A search party was organized, but came back empty-handed, unable to navigate the deep snow and treacherous conditions. Eleanor heard Walter and some other men talking in the store about how anyone caught up on the mountain during the storm was almost certainly dead. She felt something inside her go cold and still, her hands freezing in the middle of folding a bolt of cloth. What about Quentin Xerxes? she asked before she could stop herself. The men looked at her with surprise. Walter's expression darkened. "The hermit who lives up on the North Ridge," one of the other men said. "He was not with the missing trappers. He probably rode out the storm in his cabin. He is experienced enough to keep good supplies." Eleanor released a breath she had not realized she was holding. He was alive. He was safe. It should not have mattered so much, but it did, more than anything else in her carefully controlled life. That night, Walter confronted her in the parlor, his voice tight with controlled anger. "You made a fool of both of us today, asking about that man in front of others. People are already talking about how you watched for him during the storm. I will not be a laughingstock, Eleanor. I will not have my wife mooning over some primitive mountain man who lives like an animal." "I was concerned," Eleanor said, lifting her chin. "He saved my life. Is it so wrong to care whether he survived the storm?" "Yes," Walter said flatly. "It is wrong when you are my wife, and your concern makes people question your virtue and my authority. I have been patient with you, Eleanor. I have given you a good home, security, everything I promised. But my patience has limits. You will cease this inappropriate fascination immediately." Eleanor looked at her husband, at his neat mustache and cold eyes and rigid spine, and felt something inside her finally break free from the careful control she had maintained for months. "Or what?" she asked quietly. "What will you do, Walter?" "You cannot force me to stop caring about someone who showed me more kindness in one day than you have in all our months of marriage. You cannot control my thoughts or my heart no matter how much you control everything else." Walter's face flushed with anger. "You are my wife. You owe me obedience." "I owe you the fulfillment of our agreement," Eleanor shot back. "I manage your household. I help in your store. I appear beside you in church. I have done everything you asked. But you cannot command my feelings, and I am tired of pretending this marriage is anything but the cold business arrangement it has always been." "How dare you?" Walter started, but Eleanor was not finished. "Did you ever even want a wife, Walter? Or did you just want an unpaid employee who could also fulfill your marital duties? Because that is what I am to you, is it not? A useful object, like your store inventory. Something to be managed and controlled and kept in proper order." She saw the truth of it in his eyes before he could hide it, and felt a strange sense of relief at having finally named the thing that had made her so desperately unhappy. "I want a divorce," she said, the words falling into the space between them like stones into still water. Walter stared at her in shock. "You cannot be serious. Do you have any idea what that would mean? The scandal, the social consequences. You would be ruined. No respectable person would associate with a divorced woman." "Perhaps," Eleanor agreed, "but I would be free. And right now that seems worth any price." They argued long into the night, Walter alternating between anger and bargaining, trying to convince Eleanor she was being foolish, emotional, that she would regret throwing away security for some romantic notion that would never sustain her. But Eleanor had finally admitted to herself what she wanted, and she could not go back to pretending. In the end, Walter agreed to the divorce, not out of compassion, but because he refused to be married to a woman who openly disrespected him. He told her she could stay in the spare room until the legal proceedings were complete, and then she would be on her own. Eleanor agreed, feeling lighter than she had in months despite the uncertain future ahead. The news spread through Loveland like wildfire. People whispered and stared when Eleanor walked down the street. The women from church stopped calling on her. Even some of the customers in the store made pointed comments about modern women who did not understand the sanctity of marriage. Eleanor bore it all with her head high, working in the store because she still needed money to live, and Walter, for all his faults, did not break their agreement. She saved every penny she could, planning for the day when the divorce would be final and she would have to find her own way. She thought often about leaving Loveland entirely, going to Denver or even back east where no one knew her story. But something kept her in this small mountain town, some stubborn hope she barely admitted even to herself. Spring came slowly to the mountains, snow melting to reveal the world beneath. Quentin appeared in town on a bright April morning, his first trip down since before the blizzard. Eleanor was in the store when he walked in, and their eyes met across the space between them. She saw him take in her appearance, the way she had lost weight over the winter, the shadows under her eyes from sleepless nights. His jaw tightened, and something fierce flashed in his winter eyes. Walter emerged from the back, and his expression soured when he saw Quentin. "We are closed," he said flatly, despite the open sign on the door and Eleanor standing right there. "The door was unlocked," Quentin said, his deep voice carefully neutral. "I have furs to trade. Not interested. Try the general store down the street." Eleanor watched this exchange with growing anger. Whatever else had happened, Quentin had done nothing to deserve being treated poorly because Walter was bitter about his failed marriage. "Mr. Xerxes," she said, stepping forward before Walter could stop her. "Please, let me see your furs." "I will give you a fair price." "Eleanor," Walter said sharply, "go to the back." "No." Eleanor met her almost former husband's eyes steadily. "I still work here, I still help with trades, and I will not stand by while you cheat someone out of spite." Walter's face flushed, but he did not argue, perhaps aware that making a scene would only feed the gossip that already swirled around them. He turned and stalked into the back room, leaving Eleanor alone with Quentin. She examined his furs carefully, naming fair prices that made Quentin's eyebrows rise slightly. When the transaction was complete and he had gathered his supplies, he paused at the counter. "Are you well, Mrs. Pritchard?" he asked quietly. "It is just Eleanor," she said, "and I will be." The divorce should be final within a few weeks. Something shifted in Quentin's expression. "I heard rumors in town. I am sorry if I caused you trouble." "You did not cause anything," Eleanor said firmly. "You saved my life. Any trouble I am in is because I finally stopped lying to myself about what I want." "And what do you want?" Quentin asked, his winter eyes searching her face with that same intensity she remembered from their first meeting. Eleanor opened her mouth to answer, but Walter emerged from the back room and Quentin straightened, the moment broken. He nodded to them both and left the store, and Eleanor watched him go with her heart pounding against her ribs. That night she lay awake in her spare room and thought about what she wanted. She wanted freedom, yes, but not just freedom from Walter. She wanted to feel safe the way she had felt safe in Quentin's arms. She wanted to be looked at as though she mattered, as though her thoughts and feelings had value. She wanted to know what it would be like to be touched by someone who saw her as more than a useful object. She wanted Quentin Xerxes, and the realization was both terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. The divorce became final in early May. Walter handed her the papers with visible relief, along with a small amount of money that was less than she had earned, but more than he was legally required to give her. Eleanor took it and her few possessions, and moved into the boarding house at the edge of town, a respectable establishment run by a widow named Mrs. Thornton, who did not seem to judge her for her failed marriage. Eleanor found work doing laundry and mending for several families in town who were willing to overlook her scandalous past in exchange for good, reliable work. It was hard labor but honest, and Eleanor found she did not mind the calluses that formed on her hands or the ache in her back at the end of long days. She was free, supporting herself by her own efforts, and that was worth more than all of Walter's security had ever been. Summer came to the Colorado mountains in a riot of wildflowers and green growth. Eleanor walked through town on her rare free afternoons and felt as though she could finally breathe properly for the first time in months. She spoke to people who would speak to her, ignored those who would not, and slowly began to build a life that belonged to her alone. But in the quiet moments, in the evenings when her work was done, and she sat on the boarding house porch watching the sun set behind the mountains, she thought about Quentin. She wondered if he ever came to town anymore, if Walter's hostility had driven him to trade elsewhere. She wondered if he ever thought about her, or if she had been nothing more than a brief interruption in his solitary life. Then in late June, on an afternoon when the air was thick with the promise of a thunderstorm, Eleanor was walking back from a delivery when she saw Quentin standing outside the general store loading supplies onto a pack horse. Her feet stopped moving of their own accord, and she simply stood there on the board sidewalk, staring at him like a foolish girl. He turned as though he had felt her gaze, and their eyes met across the dusty street. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Quentin secured the last of his supplies and walked toward her with those long, steady strides that covered ground so easily. Eleanor's heart hammered in her chest as he approached, and she had to consciously remind herself to breathe. "Eleanor," he said when he stopped in front of her, and the sound of her name in his deep voice made something in her chest tighten. "I heard you have been working hard. Are you doing well?" "I am," she said, and found it was true. "Better than I was, thank you for asking." Quentin studied her face for a long moment, and Eleanor had the sense he was weighing something, coming to some decision. Finally, he said, "Would you walk with me? There is something I want to say, but not here in the middle of town." Eleanor knew she should say no, knew that walking off with him would only feed the gossip that had finally begun to die down. But she had spent months being practical and careful, and it had made her miserable. So instead she said, "Yes," and fell into step beside him as he led her out of town toward the tree line. They walked in silence until the buildings were behind them, and they stood at the edge of a meadow filled with purple lupine and yellow arnica. Thunder rumbled in the distance, but the storm was still far off, the air electric with anticipation. Quentin stopped and turned to face her, and Eleanor saw something in his expression she had never seen before, a vulnerability that sat strangely on his hard features. "I should not have stayed away," he said abruptly. "After that first day when I brought you to town, I should have found a reason to see you to check that you were well. But I thought you wanted the life you chose, the security that merchant could give you. I thought I had no right to interfere." Eleanor's breath caught. "And now I hear you divorced him. I hear you are working yourself to exhaustion just to survive. I hear you are living alone at that boarding house with no one to help you or protect you." His hands clenched into fists at his sides. "And I cannot stay away anymore. I have tried. I have told myself for months that you made your choice and I should respect it. But I cannot stop thinking about you, Eleanor. I cannot stop remembering how you looked at me that last time in the mercantile, or the way you felt in my arms when I carried you down the mountain." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. "I think about that too," she whispered. "All the time. I think about how safe I felt with you, how you were the only person who looked at me and saw me rather than what I could do for them. I made a terrible mistake marrying Walter, but I did not know then what I know now." "What do you know now?" Quentin asked, stepping closer, and Eleanor could feel the heat radiating from his large frame. "That security without happiness is just another kind of prison. That I would rather struggle and be free than be comfortable and trapped, that I want." She trailed off, suddenly shy despite everything. "What do you want, Eleanor?" His voice was low and intense, his winter eyes searching her face. "You," she said simply. "I want you. I know it is foolish. I know you chose solitude for a reason and probably do not want a woman complicating your life. But you asked what I wanted, and I am tired of lying." For a moment Quentin just stared at her, and Eleanor felt panic rise in her throat. She had misread everything. He was going to tell her gently that she was confused, that what she felt was gratitude, not love, that he was not interested in her that way. Then he reached out and cupped her face in his large, calloused hands with surprising gentleness, and Eleanor's breath stopped entirely. "You are not foolish," he said roughly. "And I did not choose solitude because I preferred being alone. I chose it because I could not find anyone I wanted to share my life with. But I want to share it with you, Eleanor. I have wanted that since the moment I saw you at the creek, lost and exhausted but still trying so hard to be brave. I stayed away because I thought it was the honorable thing to do, but honor seems less important than happiness right now." Eleanor felt tears spill over and run down her cheeks. Quentin's thumbs wiped them away, his touch infinitely gentle despite the strength in his hands. "I have nothing to offer you but a cabin in the mountains," he said. "No fancy things, no security, just me and a hard life. But I swear to you I would spend every day trying to make you happy. I would never take you for granted or treat you like a useful object. You would be my partner, my equal, the most important thing in my world." "Yes," Eleanor said, not needing to hear more. "Yes to all of it. I do not want fancy things or an easy life. I just want to be with someone who sees me and values me and makes me feel the way you do." Quentin made a sound low in his throat and pulled her against his chest, wrapping his strong arms around her. Eleanor clung to him and felt more at home than she had in any actual house she had ever lived in. She could feel his heart pounding against her ear, could feel the way his breath stirred her hair, could feel the solid reality of him surrounding her. "Come home with me," he said into her hair. "Come back to the cabin where you were safe. Stay with me and let me take care of you the way I wanted to from the start." Eleanor pulled back enough to look up at him. "People will talk. They will say terrible things about me running off with you so soon after my divorce. You care what they say?" Eleanor thought about it and realized she did not anymore. She had spent too much of her life worrying about what others thought, trying to be respectable and proper and acceptable. It had brought her nothing but misery. "No," she said. "I do not care." Quentin smiled then, the first real smile she had ever seen on his hard face, and it transformed him completely. He looked younger, lighter, as though some burden had been lifted. "Then we leave now. I have supplies. We can be at the cabin before full dark if we do not delay." Eleanor laughed, feeling giddy and reckless and wonderfully free. "I need to get my things from the boarding house, my clothes and the money I saved." "Quickly then," Quentin said, but he did not release her immediately. Instead he bent his head and kissed her, a soft, tentative press of lips that made Eleanor's whole body light up like she had been struck by lightning. His mouth was warm and firm against hers, tasting like coffee and something wild and clean. Eleanor kissed him back with all the longing she had been suppressing for months, her hands fisting in his buckskin shirt, trying to get closer. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard. Quentin rested his forehead against hers, and Eleanor felt his hands trembling slightly where they gripped her waist. "You are sure?" he asked. "Once we leave, there is no going back. People will assume the worst. Your reputation will be gone completely." "I am sure," Eleanor said firmly. "My reputation has been worth nothing but loneliness and judgment. I would rather be happy than respectable." They hurried back to town together, and Eleanor collected her few possessions while Quentin waited with the horses. Mrs. Thornton watched from the parlor window but said nothing, and Eleanor left money on the table for the rent she owed. Then she was outside, and Quentin was lifting her onto his horse with the same easy strength he had shown carrying her down the mountain. and they were riding out of Loveland together as thunder finally broke overhead and rain began to fall in sheets. The ride up into the mountains took hours, and Eleanor was soaked to the skin within minutes, but she did not care. She sat in front of Quentin on his large bay horse, his arms around her as he controlled the reins, his body sheltering her from the worst of the wind. She felt his chest against her back, solid and warm, felt his breath against her wet hair, and thought she had never been so completely, perfectly happy. The cabin appeared out of the rain and darkness like a beacon. Quentin dismounted and lifted Eleanor down, then quickly got the horse into the lean-to stable before returning to usher her inside. He built up the fire while Eleanor stood dripping on the floor, suddenly shy now that they were here, now that the decision had been made. Quentin straightened from the fire and looked at her across the cabin. "You need to get out of those wet clothes. You will catch your death." He went to the chest and pulled out one of his own shirts, large enough to drown her. "Here, put this on and hang your dress by the fire to dry." He turned his back, giving her privacy, and Eleanor quickly stripped out of her soaked dress and undergarments, pulling on his shirt. It fell to her knees and smelled like wood smoke and pine and him. She hung her wet things on pegs near the fire, then stood awkwardly, not sure what to do now. Quentin turned back and his eyes darkened when he saw her wearing his shirt, something heated and possessive flickering in their pale depths. "You should sleep," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "You have had a long day. Where will you sleep?" Eleanor asked, though she thought she knew what she wanted the answer to be. Quentin was quiet for a long moment. "Where do you want me to sleep, Eleanor?" She took a breath for courage and said, "With me. I want you to sleep with me. I want more than that if you want it too. Are you certain?" Quentin asked, not moving toward her though she could see the tension in his frame. "We do not have to rush. I can wait until you are ready." "I am ready," Eleanor said, and it was true. She had made this choice with clear eyes and a full heart. She wanted this, wanted him, wanted to finally know what it was like to be with someone who truly desired her, rather than viewing her as a duty. Quentin crossed the cabin in 3 long strides and pulled her against him, his mouth finding hers in a kiss that was nothing like the gentle one earlier. This was hungry and deep and demanding, and Eleanor met it with equal fervor, her arms wrapping around his neck as his hands roamed over her back, exploring the curves hidden beneath his oversized shirt. He lifted her easily and carried her to the bed, laying her down on the furs with surprising gentleness. Then he pulled off his own wet shirt, and Eleanor's breath caught at the sight of him. His chest and arms were ridged with muscle, his skin bronzed from sun and marked with old scars. He was beautiful in a raw, powerful way that made her whole body tighten with want. Quentin joined her on the bed, his weight settling over her, and looked down into her eyes. "Tell me if you want me to stop," he said. "At any moment for any reason. Promise me, Eleanor." "I promise," she said, touched by his care even though she had no intention of asking him to stop. "But I will not want you to stop. I want all of you, Quentin. Everything you are willing to give me." He kissed her again, deep and thorough, and his hands began to explore with increasing boldness. Eleanor had thought she knew what this would be like based on her brief experience with Walter, but this was entirely different. Where Walter had been quick and mechanical, Quentin was slow and thorough, learning her body as though he had all the time in the world. His hands and mouth found places that made her gasp and arch, sensations she had never imagined blooming through her whole being. When he finally joined their bodies together, it hurt for only a moment, and then there was only pleasure and closeness, and the incredible feeling of being wanted, truly wanted, by this strong, gentle man who looked at her as though she was precious. Eleanor clung to him and moved with him, and when the pleasure crested she cried out his name, feeling more connected to another person than she ever had in her life. Afterward, Quentin pulled her close against his side, his large hand stroking her hair while they both caught their breath. Eleanor traced the scars on his chest with gentle fingers and felt his heart beating strong and steady beneath her palm. "I love you," she said, because after everything there seemed no point in hiding it. She felt Quentin go still beneath her, then his arms tightened around her. "I love you too," he said roughly. "I did not think I could feel this way about anyone, but you changed everything, Eleanor. From the moment I saw you at that creek, lost and trying so hard to be brave, I was lost too." Eleanor tilted her head back to look at him and saw everything she felt reflected in his winter eyes. She kissed him softly and settled back against his chest, listening to rain drum on the roof and feeling safer than she had ever felt anywhere. She had come to Colorado as a mail-order bride seeking security and ended up finding something infinitely more valuable. She had found love, real and deep and transformative, with a man who saw her for who she truly was and valued her anyway. She had found home, not in a building but in another person's arms. Eleanor fell asleep wrapped in Quentin's embrace and did not dream of anything because her reality was better than any dream could be. The next weeks passed in a haze of happiness Eleanor had not known was possible. She learned the rhythms of life in the mountain cabin, how to tan hides and preserve meat, how to recognize edible plants and avoid dangerous animals. Quentin was an excellent teacher, patient and thorough, and Eleanor proved to be a quick study. She had spent her whole life learning to work hard, and this work felt meaningful in a way factory labor never had. They talked for hours by firelight, sharing their histories with each other. Quentin told her about growing up in Missouri, about fighting in the war and seeing things that haunted him still, about coming west afterward and finding peace in the wilderness. Eleanor told him about her mother, about her uncle's factory, about choosing marriage to Walter out of desperation and slowly realizing what a prison she had walked into. "I was not always alone in the mountains," Quentin admitted one evening as they sat together watching the fire. "When I first came west, I joined up with other trappers, traveled in groups, but I found most people exhausting. They wanted things from me, wanted me to be something I was not. It was easier to be alone where I only had to be myself." "And now?" Eleanor asked, nestled against his side with his arm around her shoulders. "Now is different. You do not want me to be anything but what I am. You do not try to change me or fix me. You just accept me." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "It makes being with you feel like another kind of solitude, the good kind where I can still be myself, but do not have to be lonely." Eleanor understood exactly what he meant. She had never felt she could be fully herself with anyone, had always had to hide parts of her personality or interests to fit what others expected. But with Quentin she could be practical when needed and dreamy when she wanted, could work hard alongside him or sit quietly reading from his small collection of books, and he valued all of it equally. The summer deepened and Eleanor bloomed like the wildflowers that covered the mountain meadows. The hard work and fresh air brought color to her cheeks and strength to her frame. She learned to shoot Quentin's rifle, to set snares, to read the signs of weather in the sky. She also made the cabin more of a home, sewing curtains from cloth Quentin traded for, arranging their supplies more efficiently, planting a small garden in a sunny patch near the clearing. Quentin watched her settle into mountain life with something like wonder in his eyes, as though he could not quite believe she was real and choosing to stay with him. He touched her often, small gestures of affection like brushing her hair back or taking her hand while they walked, as though reassuring himself she was truly there. They made love often, and Eleanor discovered she had an appetite for physical intimacy that had been completely dormant during her brief marriage. With Quentin, she felt free to explore and experiment, to discover what brought pleasure to both of them. He was an attentive lover, strong and passionate but always gentle, always making sure she found satisfaction before seeking his own. "I never knew it could be like this," Eleanor confessed one night as they lay tangled together in the aftermath of passion. "I thought physical relations were just something women had to endure." Quentin's arms tightened around her. "It makes me angry what that man did to you, how he made you think you were just something to be used." "But I am not angry anymore," Eleanor said, tilting her head to look up at him. "Because if my marriage had been good, if Walter had made me happy, I might have stayed with him and never known what this could be. My mistake brought me to you, so I cannot truly regret it." "Still," Quentin said, his voice dark, "you deserved better from the start." "I have better now," Eleanor said simply, and kissed him until the shadows left his eyes. As summer turned toward fall, Eleanor realized her monthly courses had not come. She said nothing at first, not wanting to worry Quentin if she was wrong. But when another week passed and certain other signs appeared, she could no longer deny what was happening. She was pregnant. The realization filled her with a complex mixture of joy and fear. She wanted Quentin's child, wanted to build a family with him in this mountain cabin, but she also knew how dangerous childbirth could be, especially this far from town and a doctor. She had seen women die in Philadelphia, had attended enough funerals to know that bearing children was one of the most dangerous things a woman could do. But she could not hide this from Quentin, would not want to even if she could. So one evening after supper, she took his hand and led him outside to sit on the porch where they could watch the sun set behind the mountains. "I have something to tell you," she said, holding his hand tightly between both of hers. "I am with child. I am fairly certain, based on the signs." Quentin went completely still beside her. Eleanor held her breath, suddenly terrified he would be angry or upset, that this would be the thing that made him regret taking her in. Then he turned to her and she saw his eyes were bright with moisture, his expression more open than she had ever seen it. "Truly," he asked, his voice rough, "you are certain?" "As certain as I can be without seeing a doctor. My courses have not come in 2 months and I have been feeling strange in the mornings." Eleanor searched his face anxiously. "Are you angry? I know we did not plan for this." "Angry?" Quentin pulled her against his chest, his large hand cradling the back of her head. "Eleanor, I am happier than I have ever been in my life. I never thought I would have a family, never thought I would find someone who would want to build a life with me. And now you are telling me we are going to have a child." His voice cracked slightly. "How could I be anything but grateful?" Eleanor felt tears slip down her cheeks and did not bother to hide them. "I am frightened," she admitted. "Childbirth is dangerous, and we are so far from help if something goes wrong." "Then we will go to town when your time is near," Quentin said firmly. "We will make sure you have a midwife or doctor, whatever you need to be safe. I will not take chances with your life, Eleanor. You are too precious to me." They sat together in the gathering dusk and talked about the future, about the baby who would arrive in spring, about how their life would change. Quentin was already planning, talking about building a cradle, about storing extra supplies for winter, about teaching their child to love these mountains the way he did. Eleanor listened to him and felt her fear ease, replaced by tentative joy. She was going to be a mother. She was going to have a child with this man she loved, raise that child in this wild, beautiful place where they were free to live as they chose. The fall brought crisp air and trees painted in gold and crimson. Quentin hunted and trapped with renewed intensity, building up their stores for the winter ahead. Eleanor helped where she could, though he was careful not to let her overwork herself in her condition. She spent time preserving meat and vegetables, sewing tiny clothes from soft leather and cloth, preparing for the baby who grew inside her. When the first snow fell in early November, Quentin made a decision. "We need to go to town," he said, watching Eleanor carefully. "I know you do not want to face people there, but you need to see someone who knows about childbirth. We need to make arrangements for when your time comes." Eleanor had been dreading this, but she knew he was right. "Will you stay with me?" she asked. "I cannot do it alone." "I will never leave your side," Quentin promised. They rode down to Loveland on a clear, cold morning, Eleanor bundled in furs and seated in front of Quentin on his horse. The town looked exactly as she remembered, though it felt like a lifetime had passed since she left. People stared as they rode down the main street, whispers following in their wake. Eleanor lifted her chin and refused to show shame for her choices. They found the doctor's office, and Quentin helped Eleanor down from the horse, his arm steady around her waist. "Doctor." Harrison was an older man with kind eyes who had seen enough of life not to judge. He examined Eleanor carefully and confirmed what she already knew. "You are healthy and the baby seems to be developing well," he said. "When is your time due?" "Late March or early April, I think," Eleanor said. Dr. Harrison nodded. "You should come back to town a few weeks before then. I have rooms above my office where expectant mothers can stay if they live far out. That way help is close when labor begins." Eleanor and Quentin thanked him and paid for the visit, then stepped back out onto the street. Eleanor took a breath, steeling herself, then said, "I need to see Walter. I need to tell him properly, face to face, that I am expecting your child. He will hear the gossip anyway, and I would rather he hear the truth from me." Quentin's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "I will come with you." They walked together to Pritchard's Mercantile. The store was busy with people preparing for winter, and conversation died when Eleanor and Quentin entered. Walter looked up from behind the counter, and his face went through several expressions in quick succession: shock, anger, hurt, resignation. Eleanor walked up to the counter with Quentin a solid presence at her back. "Walter," she said quietly, "I wanted you to hear this from me. I am with child. Quentin and I are building a life together in the mountains. I wanted to tell you directly rather than let you hear it as gossip." Walter stared at her, then at Quentin's protective stance behind her. "I see," he said finally, his voice carefully neutral. "Well, I suppose I should say congratulations." "Walter," Eleanor said gently, "I am sorry I hurt you. I know our marriage ending was painful for both of us, but I hope you can understand that I had to choose happiness over security. I hope you find someone who can be what you need, because I could not be that person." Walter was quiet for a long moment, then he nodded slowly. "I was not what you needed either," he admitted. "I wanted a wife who would fit into the life I had planned, and you wanted more than I could give. Perhaps it is better this way, better to be honest than to spend years pretending." It was as close to a blessing as Eleanor would get from her former husband, and she was grateful for it. They left the store and mounted Quentin's horse, riding out of town through a gauntlet of stares and whispers that Eleanor barely noticed. She leaned back against Quentin's chest and felt only relief that the confrontation was over. Winter settled over the mountains with serious intent. Snow piled high around the cabin, and Quentin had to dig paths to the stable and the woodpile. They were snowbound for weeks at a time, but Eleanor found she did not mind. There was something cozy about being snowed in with the man she loved, the two of them creating their own small world inside the warm cabin while storms raged outside. Quentin was endlessly patient with Eleanor's changing moods and needs as her pregnancy progressed. When her back ached, he rubbed it with strong, gentle hands. When she craved strange foods, he did his best to provide them or find substitutes. When she felt huge and ungainly, he told her she had never been more beautiful and made love to her with such tenderness she cried. "I cannot believe you want me like this," she said one evening as they lay together, his hand resting on her swollen belly where their child kicked and moved. "You are carrying my baby," Quentin said, pressing a kiss to her shoulder. "How could I not want you? You are everything I never knew I needed, Eleanor, everything." The winter deepened and Eleanor's belly grew round and tight. When the baby moved, she would call Quentin over to feel, and they would sit together with his large hands spread across her stomach, marveling at the life they had created. Quentin talked to the baby sometimes, his deep voice rumbling through Eleanor's body, and she would laugh at the strange intimacy of it. "What do you want to name the baby?" she asked one night. "I had a brother who died in the war," Quentin said quietly. "His name was James." "If the baby is a boy, I would like to name him James, if you agree." "And if it is a girl," Eleanor asked, "you should choose then. You are doing all the hard work of growing her." Eleanor thought about it. "Catherine, after my mother, we could call her Kate." Quentin smiled and kissed her. "Catherine if it is a girl, James if it is a boy. Perfect." As March approached and the snow began to melt, Quentin became increasingly anxious about getting Eleanor back to town. "We should go now," he said. "Your time is close and I do not want to risk being caught in a late storm." Eleanor agreed, though leaving the cabin felt strange after months of isolation. They packed carefully, bringing everything Eleanor might need for lying in. The ride down the mountain took 2 days with frequent stops for Eleanor's comfort, but finally they arrived in Loveland and Dr. Harrison welcomed them to his rooms above the office. "You made the right choice coming early," he said after examining Eleanor. "The baby could come any time in the next few weeks. Better to be here where I can help if needed." Quentin found a small house at the edge of town to rent, unwilling to be separated from Eleanor even for a night. He set up their temporary home with the same care he had shown in the cabin, making sure Eleanor was comfortable and had everything she needed. The waiting was difficult. Eleanor felt huge and uncomfortable, tired of pregnancy and impatient to meet their child. Quentin hovered, trying to hide his anxiety but clearly terrified something would go wrong. Eleanor held his hand and reassured him as best she could, though she was frightened too. Then one morning in early April, Eleanor woke to pain radiating through her lower back and knew her time had come. "Quentin," she gasped, gripping his arm. "The baby is coming." Quentin went pale but moved quickly, helping her dress and getting her to Dr. Harrison's office. The doctor took one look at Eleanor and nodded. "Labor has begun. Let us get you upstairs and comfortable." What followed was the longest, most difficult day of Eleanor's life. Labor was painful and exhausting, waves of contractions that seemed endless. Quentin stayed with her throughout, holding her hand, wiping her face with cool cloths, murmuring encouragement even when Eleanor cursed him for getting her pregnant in the first place. "I am sorry," he said over and over. "I am so sorry, Eleanor. I wish I could do this instead of you." "You cannot," Eleanor gasped between contractions. "So just stay with me and do not leave." "Never," Quentin promised. "I will never leave you." As the sun set and evening shadows filled the room, Eleanor felt something shift inside her. The urge to push became overwhelming and Dr. Harrison said, "Now, Eleanor, push now." She bore down with all her strength, holding tight to Quentin's hand, and felt the baby begin to move through her body. The pain was incredible, but there was purpose in it, a knowledge that each push brought her closer to meeting her child. "I can see the head," Dr. Harrison said. "One more good push, Eleanor. You can do this." Eleanor gathered every bit of strength she had left and pushed with everything in her. She felt the baby slip free in a rush of relief, and then there was crying, loud and healthy and perfect. Eleanor fell back against the pillows, exhausted and triumphant and crying herself. "It is a boy," Dr. Harrison announced, cleaning the baby quickly. "A healthy boy with a fine set of lungs." He placed the baby on Eleanor's chest, and she looked down at the tiny red face, the perfect little fingers that grasped at air, the dark hair plastered to his small head. "James," she whispered. "Hello, James." Quentin was crying too, tears streaming down his hard face as he looked at his son. "He is perfect," he said, his voice breaking. "You are perfect, Eleanor. You did this. You brought our son into the world." Eleanor reached up and took Quentin's hand, placing it on the baby's back. Their son quieted at the touch of his father's large, gentle hand, and Eleanor felt her heart expand with so much love she thought it might burst. They stayed in town for 2 weeks after James was born, giving Eleanor time to recover from the birth. Quentin was an attentive father, learning to change diapers and soothe the baby when he cried. He was clumsy at first, his large hands seeming too rough for such a delicate infant, but James clearly loved his father's touch, settling quickly when Quentin held him against his broad chest. Eleanor watched her husband with their son, and fell even more deeply in love with him. This large, strong man who had lived alone in the wilderness by choice had transformed into someone who sang lullabies in his deep voice and paced the floor at night when the baby would not sleep. And Eleanor thought she had never seen anything more beautiful. When Eleanor was strong enough, they made the journey back to the cabin, going slowly for the baby's sake. James slept in a sling against Eleanor's chest, and Quentin led the horse carefully over rough terrain, his eyes constantly checking to make sure his family was safe. The cabin felt like coming home. They settled back into mountain life with a new rhythm that included feeding times and diaper changes and the soft sounds of a baby discovering the world. James was a good baby, healthy and alert, and he seemed to thrive in the mountain air. Eleanor had never been happier. She spent her days caring for James and managing the cabin, watching her son grow stronger and more alert. Quentin hunted and trapped but never went far, unwilling to leave his family for long. In the evenings, they would sit together by the fire with James between them, marveling at the life they had created. "I never knew I could feel this way," Quentin confessed one night with James sleeping against his chest. "So full of love it almost hurts. So terrified something will happen to either of you. So grateful every single day that you chose me, that you stayed." "I will always choose you," Eleanor said, leaning against his shoulder. "This life, here in these mountains with you and James, is everything I never knew I wanted. I would not change a single thing." The months passed, and James grew from an infant to a curious toddler who loved exploring the clearing around the cabin. Quentin made him a small carved horse that became his favorite toy, and Eleanor sewed him clothes from soft leather that could withstand his adventures. They were a family, complete and happy, living simply but richly in their mountain home. When James was 2 years old, Eleanor found herself pregnant again. This time there was less fear and more excitement as they prepared for their second child. They made another trip to town in the early spring, and this time Eleanor gave birth to a daughter with Quentin's winter eyes and Eleanor's determined chin. "Catherine," Eleanor whispered, holding their daughter close. "Kate, like we planned." Their family expanded, and the cabin echoed with children's laughter. James was a protective older brother, already showing signs of his father's quiet strength. Kate was fierce and independent, refusing to be left out of anything her brother did. Quentin built additions to the cabin as their family grew, expanding their home to accommodate their children. He taught James to hunt and fish, to read the forest and respect the wilderness. Eleanor taught Kate to read and sew, but also to shoot straight and set snares, determined her daughter would be as capable as any son. The years passed in a gentle rhythm of seasons and growing children. When James was 8 and Kate was 6, Eleanor gave birth to twin boys, Thomas and William, who brought chaos and joy in equal measure. The cabin was loud and messy and full of love, and Eleanor could not imagine wanting anything different. Quentin had softened over the years, his hard edges worn smooth by family life, but he was still strong and protective, still the man who had carried a lost woman down a mountain and changed both their lives forever. Eleanor still caught him watching her sometimes with wonder in his eyes, as though he could not quite believe she was real. "What are you thinking?" she asked one evening as they sat on the porch watching their 4 children play in the clearing. "That I am the luckiest man alive," Quentin said simply. "That you came into my life when I thought I would always be alone and gave me everything I never knew I needed. Family, purpose, happiness, love. All because a stagecoach overturned and you got lost in the wilderness." Eleanor took his hand and laced their fingers together. "I was not lost," she said. "I was finding my way home. I just did not know it yet." They sat together in the golden evening light, surrounded by the sounds of their children's laughter and the wild beauty of the Colorado mountains. And Eleanor knew with absolute certainty that she had made the right choice. She had traded security for love, propriety for happiness, and gained a life richer than she had ever imagined possible. She had come to the West as a mail-order bride seeking a practical arrangement, and instead found a passionate love that had transformed her completely. She had been saved by a mountain man who carried her to safety, and in return she had saved him from loneliness, giving him the family and connection he had been missing without knowing it. Their story was not the neat, respectable life she had once thought she wanted. It was better. It was real and wild and full of love, lived on their own terms in a place where they were free to be exactly who they were. Eleanor looked at her husband, her children, her mountain home, and knew this was what happily ever after really looked like. Not perfect, not easy, but honest and full of love and absolutely, completely right. Years continued to flow like the creek that ran near their cabin. James grew tall and strong like his father, eventually building his own small cabin on the far side of their land, when he married a quiet girl from Loveland who loved the mountains as much as he did. Kate married a doctor who agreed to set up practice in Loveland so she could stay near her family, and she divided her time between helping her husband and hunting with her father, refusing to give up either part of herself. The twins carved their own paths, Thomas becoming a guide for settlers moving west, William choosing to study law in Denver but returning home every summer to help with hunting season. All 4 children carried with them the lessons Eleanor and Quentin had taught them about love, respect, independence, and the importance of choosing happiness over convention. Eleanor and Quentin grew older together, silver threading through their hair, lines deepening in their faces, but their love never wavered. They still sat together on the porch in the evenings, still held hands like young lovers, still looked at each other with the same wonder and devotion they had felt from the start. When they became grandparents, they opened their home to a new generation, teaching their grandchildren the same skills and values they had instilled in their own children. The cabin was expanded again to accommodate family gatherings, and it was never quiet, never empty, always full of the love and laughter that had defined Eleanor and Quentin's life together. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children organized a celebration that brought together everyone whose lives they had touched. The cabin clearing was filled with people, food, and music, and Eleanor stood with Quentin watching it all with a full heart. "You ever regret it?" she asked him quietly. "Giving up your solitude for all of this chaos?" Quentin pulled her close and kissed the top of her head, the gesture as familiar and comforting as breathing. Not for a single moment. You gave me everything, Eleanor. A family, a purpose, a reason to be more than just a man surviving alone in the wilderness. You gave me life, real life, and I have been grateful every day since I found you lost by that creek. I was not lost, Eleanor said, repeating the words that had become their private truth. I was finding my way home, and it was true. In losing her way on a mountain path, Eleanor had found everything that truly mattered. She had found love and family and a life lived on her own terms. She had found Quentin, who had carried her miles through the wilderness to safety, and then stayed by her side through everything that followed. Their story became a legend in Loveland, the tale of the mail-order bride who got lost and the mountain man who found her. People told it to their children as a reminder that sometimes the wrong turns lead us exactly where we are meant to be, that love can be found in the most unexpected places, and that the most important journey is the one that brings us home to ourselves and to the people we are meant to love. Eleanor and Quentin lived long, full lives surrounded by children and grandchildren. Their love story an example of what was possible when two people chose each other completely, without reservation or regret. When they finally passed, within months of each other as though neither could bear to live without the other, they were laid to rest on a hill overlooking their cabin with the mountains rising behind them and the valley spread below. Their children and grandchildren gathered to remember them, sharing stories of their love and strength and the family they had built together. And in the telling of those stories, Eleanor and Quentin lived on, their love as enduring as the mountains themselves, a testament to the power of choosing happiness over security, love over convention, and each other over everything else. The cabin still stood for generations after, maintained by descendants who recognized it as the birthplace of their family. And sometimes, visitors claimed, you could still feel the love that had filled those walls, the joy and laughter and deep connection between two souls who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. It was the kind of love people dream about but rarely find, the kind that transforms everything it touches and leaves the world better for having existed. It was the story of Eleanor and Quentin, the mail-order bride who got lost and the mountain man who found her, carried her home and loved her faithfully until the very end. Their happy ending was not a fairy tale but something better and more real, a life fully lived and deeply loved, surrounded by family and rooted in the wild beauty of the Colorado mountains they both called home. And that, in the end, was the greatest gift of all.